Alien abductees of Reddit or people who have claimed to see a UFO, what's your story? 1997 Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was 8 years old, playing in the sand volleyball court at the park down the street from my house. I was engrossed in my activity, burying my collection of Happy Meal toys in the sand, and then digging them back out, repeat. I was looking down, but decided suddenly that I needed to look up because the world around me had lost all sound. There was no longer any ambient noise. No traffic noise from the busy streets just a block over. No more dogs barking. No more birds chirping. I looked at the street that bordered the park, and that is when I saw it. It looked like a stealth bomber turned sideways, nose leading, one wing down toward the road and the other pointed up at the sky. Completely shiny black in color, as tall as a house, shaped like an arrowhead. It was cruising the street at 3 miles per hour. Just gliding over the road. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds. As soon as it had passed behind some 2-story houses and out of my sight, I got my hearing back full force. I ran home with my piss-soaked pants and never spoke a word of it to anybody. Edit. Here is a quick sketch I made, in all of my talented glory. I only lived in CO Springs in 1997. I lived on Don Juan Court, so I guess the park I was playing in was called Franklin Park. Immediately after, I moved back to Phoenix just in time for the Phoenix Lights. I occasionally suffer from sleep paralysis. It developed in my early 20s, and I've had the alien abduction dream. My dad and I love to watch shows about aliens, so I assume people who claim they were abducted had some form of sleep paralysis. It started with flashes of blue light, and I felt myself being lifted out of bed by the chest. I was blinded by a white light, and I could hear a loud mechanical whirring. When I woke up, I was sitting up in bed with my chest stuck out. My arms were holding me up. The experience was the most intense sleep paralysis dream I've ever had. I can see how someone else could have that dream, panic, and tell everyone about it. I was on a wildfire just south of Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. We were in fire rigs driving to the incident area, 4 trucks in close convoy, when we heard helicopters. 8 black military choppers escorted us in formation for like 10 miles. We assumed they were just doing drills and using us for fake target practice or something. A little while later we are parked and about to start hiking to the fire line when suddenly a thin column of smoke shoots probably about 200 feet into the sky. It was a good mile away, but the concussion was pretty significant when it hit us and the noise was still ridiculously loud. We thought it was probably no big deal. We knew we were near a strike zone. A good 5 minutes later an aircraft like nothing I have ever seen flew by us at maybe 500 feet. It was flat black and sort of rectangular but with fins and wells on the underside. It was moving pretty slow and was dead silent, so I have to assume it was some sort of stealth glider. It sounds ridiculous, but it immediately reminded me of a huge, flying Batmobile, Tim Burton era. After that some military personnel got on our radio frequency and instructed us to leave the area immediately. When our crew chief asked who it was and why they signed off, and the incident commander, the guy in charge of managing the entire situation, came on the radios and said we were evacuating the area. They sent us to a completely different fire about 100 miles to the south and never told us why except that it was higher priority, which was bullshit. It was already out when we got there and we just assisted crews in the mop-up operation. The thing that confuses me about this is that if the army didn't want us to see that SHT or if it was dangerous, why didn't they keep us clear of the area in the first place? Either a communications breakdown or they had an SHT situation going down and had to get us out of there without warning. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53 I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, and no car drove past. Now here is where the story takes a turn for the weird. And I am sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up and down while the dome light and headlights start to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car, so I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350 N and 50 watts. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I am sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy or they would call bullshit on the whole story. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. I've seen a couple of weird lights occasionally, and I have no recollection of being abducted. But, when I was 12 or so, I felt something hard and round in my earlobe. I told everyone and they said it was just an under-the-skin zit, pretty normal for someone my age. But it was there for 6 months. Annoyed, I decided to do some self-surgery. I could feel it very near the surface and poked a hole in my ear with a sterilized needle. Blood, everywhere. I could feel this thing and I squeezed up, towards the hole I just pierced. Out pops this tiny metal ball. Maybe half the size of a BB. It was black metal, completely spherical, with an indentation around the center, and teeny tiny golf ball-like indentations. As I was rolling it around in my blood-covered pictures, it slipped, spun around the sink a couple of times and fell down the drain. At 12, I had no idea what to do with it and my parents didn't believe a word I said and told me to just put some tea tree oil on my zits next time. I have never had anything like it since. Edit. This stood out to me because I've had cysts and this was not a cyst at all. If you have something similar, it's more than likely a cyst or similar. If it's bothering you, go to a doctor, get an X-ray. If you think you were abducted, you've got something tangible if it's unexplainable. If not, you've got some medical attention. Do not perform self-surgery because of something you read on the internet. I was 12 and dumb. Had I had a professional do it, I could have kept it and shown it. But it was a long time ago and I was dumb. Don't be dumb. Not a very spectacular story but true. I've always felt some encounter stories were real, but what made me truly believe was one night standing outside watching the stars. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and out in the country so it was dark, no street lights, very little to no moon. I was watching what I thought was a satellite moving across the sky from right to left, didn't think twice about it as I saw them all the time. Suddenly, the satellite stopped and shot off fast, totally disappeared, at a 45-degree angle from the direction it came. I have never ever seen a satellite change direction ever. It startled me so much I stood there for a bit wondering if I really saw it or not, but I did, 100% certain. It's unfortunate no one was there with me that night. Okay, here it goes. The first time I had ever seen anything I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to like to climb on top of my mom's Suburban in the driveway and stare at the stars. One night I saw an intensely bright floating light over the tree line probably about a half-mile away. I hollered but nobody came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th. But I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange strobing flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop, sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw two dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1, about 6 to 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up, completely silent. The way that they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights which were maybe 30 to 40 feet across each, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over lower and slower than the first 4 had. Then, it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. It was loud. The craft did that twice. These crafts flew directly over us and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple weeks later. I was standing in my driveway smoking a cigarette listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight, waved my hand over it a couple times making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything come up, but I got that being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me completely silent for maybe 10 to 15 seconds while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved one hand at it in a friendly manner. It then changed light pattern and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew that I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. I have seen that same craft on 3 other different occasions, once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was nighttime and I was with friends. Over the overlook, I saw a gray craft facing my direction that looked similar to a Hoth fighter, forgive the Star Wars references, and as soon as I saw it, it took off to the right silently extremely quick. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, then the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars only very low, move slower, but they still have tails that stream behind them. They can also appear in many different colors. One strange story is one night when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream, I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was laying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs around my junk. It was very strange to me since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs. The next morning, I went to let the dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother and she had told me that she heard a noise that woke her up the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Englewood neighborhood. It was nighttime and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say it was maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had what looked like white electric currents coming off of both sides of it. I looked at it and maybe about 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left one at a time at a quick pace, leaving the trail behind it that I previously talked about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward until the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've also had a bunch of experiences with orbs. Some solid lit that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up to a great intensity and then fade as they pass. After that first big experience I started doing some research because I was so confused. I understand that I've had an abnormally large amount of experiences, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contacted. These people are similar to abductees except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I have had so many experiences, and I have only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would be that since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep up with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people that I can talk with about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I could uncover. I'm grateful but still don't know much about my experiences. If you all can get anything out of what I shared, then great. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes. Disintegrates. Disappears. Whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mom and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or a flock of geese. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story and it is not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. Back in spring of 1997, a group of us neighborhood kids were looking up at the night sky observing the Hale-Bopp comet. I grew up hours from any major city, so the view was pretty clear. After a while we started to notice a red and a white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction. Like no aircraft I have ever seen or have ever seen since. At a certain point they merged into one craft, then shot out 3 smaller crafts. Although we couldn't tell whether it was a craft because they just appeared to be balls of light. This went on for a couple hours. Right before the lights disappeared they accelerated at lightning fast speed into the darkness. We all went home terrified of what we saw. The next day on the front page of our small hometown paper it said it received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. I'm sure how much I believe that story because of what I saw. To this day whenever I see my friends that were there that night we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what we saw, but to this day none of us have ever seen anything like it. I was at a program called Wilderness Quest in Utah when I was 17. Long story short, our small group saw a weird light in the sky moving at incredible speeds in multiple directions. It then seemed to enter our atmosphere accompanied by a large flash of light. Moments later 16 fighter jets, 8 stealth bombers and 1 large radar plane flew over our heads to the area we witnessed the strange light. It was a super clear night and in the middle of the Utah desert you can see the night sky extremely well, so we were able to count all the planes with ease. The next day a new wilderness guide showed up, Said he used to work for NORAD and asked us a bunch of questions about what we saw. The next morning he was gone and no one ever heard of him again. The reports in the paper said it was the Genesis satellite crashing. There is no way in hell that thing was a satellite crashing. I also just posted this earlier on the NORAD Twitter feed. Weird timing. Edit. Wilderness Quest was different 10 to 11 years ago. There wasn't all these new laws and restrictions. A kid burned down $1 million worth of forest and everything changed after I left. The guy Larry went bankrupt and sold the business. Back then we just hiked wherever we wanted to. I will post pictures when I scan them into my computer. We saw ancient Anasazi ruins that had been untouched for decades. Hordes of pottery everywhere broken into pieces. It was pretty intense. I was driving along in my car a few years ago. Broad daylight. Eastern New Mexico. It was a clear sunny day, but I could see a spherical light in the sky in the distance. It looked like a chrome sphere. It hovered there for 20 minutes or, seemingly pacing my car. Next chance I got, I stopped and took a picture of it. Yep. I saw me a UFO. I drove on home imagining all the imaginary internet points I'd get for that picture. Then I got home and put the picture onto my computer and looked at it at max magnification. Totally a weather balloon miles and miles away. Looked like a chrome sphere 5 miles away following my car. Edray, West Virginia. One night few years back my friend, who is driving, and I were taking his girlfriend home when he decided to take the long way home. As we are driving along this fairly deserted back road I began to zone out and I stare at this blinking red light off in the distance and casually think to myself, I wonder when they built a cell phone tower all the way out here. When suddenly it blinks and is dramatically closer than it was just a moment earlier. At this point my friend points it out and stops in the road. It blinks once more and is directly in front and over top of us. The red light is so bright it floods the car in a deep scarlet hue. I lean forward so that I can see directly into the light. In that brief moment I feel a flood of negative emotions. The closest description I can offer is to that of being naked under a giant microscope and having every pore examined thoroughly. I then look away from the light to my friend and ask him to drive. He barely responds, apparently in a similar state. Then he snaps out of it and starts driving. As we get a little ways down the road I notice the red light isn't fading and the interior of the car is still clearly lit by it. I look out the window and to my horror the light is following us and does so for approximately 1 to 2 miles. The light unexpectedly veers off to the left and comes down to ground level in a patch of trees adjacent to the road. My friend stops the car again and continues to stare at it and abruptly declares he is going to get out and look at like he is in some sort of trance. He opens the door and I grab his arm and tell him if he does I will get in the driver's seat and leave him, that we had to leave that instant. He looks at me and seems to come to and punches the gas so hard the tires lose traction and spin. The light remained stationary as we rode away, but I've never looked at the night sky the same. Edit. The incident occurred after dropping off my buddy's girlfriend, so she wasn't present. In my rush to type the story I forgot that part. While attending college in Chicago, I met a smoking hot girl in one of my classes. We hung out and studied together, but it wasn't long until I realized I was in the friend zone despite my efforts. One night I had invited her and some classmates over to my apartment to work on a project for class. She was the only one who showed up, so we decided to go for a walk along the shore of the lake, which was just a block from where I lived. We were walking along, talking, being friend-zoned, when all of a sudden she noticed a light over the lake that was dancing around. I saw it too. We sat and watched it for at least an hour. To this day I would swear what I saw that night was a UFO. Its movement was indescribable. The experience really hit her hard, leading her to question the meaning of life and, more importantly, lead her into my bedroom for the night. A few weeks later I was back at the same spot along the lake with a buddy of mine, telling him about what happened that night that I saw the lights. Suddenly I noticed it again. Except that this time the lighting was a bit different because of low-hanging clouds. It was at that point I realized the lights we saw that night were actually birds flying just about 100 yards offshore. One night I go down to the kitchen to drink water, at about 4 a.m., and I hear this weird, kind of low-pitched buzzing sound coming from outside. I go out to the backyard and SHTU not, I see this fucking bright rounded object, UFO, hovering about 600 feet right above me. I just froze there. I almost felt like I was paralyzed for a moment. I watched it ascend higher into the air and take off at an incredible speed and disappear into the wintry clouds. That night I had a dream that I was abducted. Now when I think about it, I wonder if the dream was real but was purposely made to seem like a dream? I obviously don't know for sure, but scary SHT man. Last time I'll tell this story on Reddit because I've said it a couple of times and it never gets noticed. Maybe 8 to 10 years ago I was with my dad and younger brother returning home to my mom's house when we were driving along this road with forest on either side, not an actual picture. My dad noticed it first and said, "Look at that." Pointing up through the sunroof and maybe 20 meters, 21 yards, above us or less was this big dark gray circle and these bright white circular lights all the same size and all equally spaced apart. It wasn't moving, or it wasn't moving fast and wasn't making any noise as far as I could tell, although we were in a Land Rover. I could see all along the bottom and sides was like square pipes running all along it, and although I am not certain, I seem to think and recall there being symbols or hieroglyphs as well. As we passed it, the top of it looked like a bowl and was a lighter gray, and it remained there fixed and in place for a good 8 to 10 minutes until we drove out of sight. My mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like "I dunno" and just drop it. For a long time, so a couple months later, Mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor. Like she was really happy and at peace, for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mom says she still doesn't really remember anything about it. But Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first, it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralyzed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently they told her all sorts of things, stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year and it would also be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They also told her that it was not their fault and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother. Another time, after that first incident. Mom says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says that you will know eventually, and she says that once she learned of the truth, then everything became wonderful. Mom has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state from her, and she apparently has a pretty normal life, and doesn't obsess over alien stuff, like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. Not your typical story, and I'm saying right now I don't believe in aliens that abduct people, not even one bit, but I always used to have nightmares about the Greys or nightmares about watching a UFO in the sky just hover and look at me. Sometime I would be minding my own business in these dreams, and when the Greys would come, a feeling of indescribable horror would overtake me. I would try to run in these dreams, but I would feel the aliens crawling into my mind. I would become staggered and dizzy, and my eyesight in a dream, would fail. My limbs wouldn't move properly then, nothingness. I would wake up sometime later shaking, perhaps trying to rid myself of the sleep paralysis. I would often sit awake for an hour or so, and every time I thought about the nightmare I would get the most intense shiver up my spine. Sometimes the dreams happened more than one night, and I always seemed to have these dreams when I travel or go on vacation. One night I decided I had had enough and went back into the dream world knowing what awaited me. Predictably the Greys came and I could feel them probing my mind again. As they got closer and I became more dizzy and unfocused, I pulled from out of nowhere a sword and killed every one of them. I woke up and I haven't had a dream like that since. It's been 3 years. I have no doubt it was just my mind and that I conquered some fear I had from watching too many Stephen King movie adaptations as a kid, but it's very interesting to think, what if they were real and were probing my dreams and I destroyed their dream avatar or something? Who knows? I'm not trying to discount people's experiences, but I think 99.99999% of all alien stories are similar to stuff I experienced: overactive dreams and sleep paralysis. First time I ever tried to write this down, first time telling anyone outside the family. I'm leaving out time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. Summer before 8th grade, me and 2 of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighborhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn a corner in our neighborhood and there's this huge black blimp-shaped thing in the sky. Like the pictures of the Hindenburg, but bigger than that and as close if not closer. Completely silent and the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across, no exaggeration. Even though I was young, we stare at it entranced, asking each other over and over again if we see it, which we all agree that we do, standing there, frozen in one place. It's like black polished gunmetal, no lights, no sound, no anything. It's just hovering there. And then I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. Next thing I remember is the craft/ship/government experiment/whatever the hell it is has gone and there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to earth with wisps of smoke coming off it. Then 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back, like F-150s or S-10s but nicer, came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25 miles per hour neighborhood. Then after that I remember walking home to one of my friends' houses and going to bed. At that point it was like 5 or 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning because he worked for the city, but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my friends who was there, but the other was my best friend and we sort of made an unspoken pact never to talk about it. Don't know how or why we did that. We all grew up and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it now, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, except in how we're not. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scared me too, plus I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there's no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV, no word spoken about it again ever by anyone. This is a true story. I'm a little older than the average around here, I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened. And there's no way I'm the only one who remembers. No way. Throwaway account. Because I'm afraid. I was first abducted in 1987. I was 12 years old. I say abducted, but it's not like that. Actually, you go willingly. It's scary, but it's exciting, too, and they are somehow able to make you feel okay about things. It's not until later that you feel bad or like you've been violated. And they don't do a lot of probing, like raping, or anything like that. That's Hollywood nonsense. They look inside of people sometimes, but they have machines that do it. Not really machines, but it's like a room where things get done and the walls are. It's hard to explain, so just imagine that all the walls are kind of like X-ray machines. That's the easiest way to describe it. Sometimes there would be others there and they would be looking into them, or they'd put them under and cut them open, but not usually. They took tissue samples from all of us, I think, and they never put you under or give you any anesthetic or anything. They just poke you. With like those things they take samples of the ocean floor? Like that, but really small. They pull out chunks of you. It's usually done on the butt or on the lower back. Mostly they talked with me. Just questions, and they'd show me things, like television shows and things, and they'd ask me questions about them. I think the walls measure our reaction to things, too, same as they take x-rays. I don't know that, but it's the feeling that I got. They never let you ask questions about what they are doing. Even once I got friendly with a few of them, they just do not like it when you ask them questions. They hate it. You can't understand their language. It just sounds like I'm positive that we'll never be able to communicate with them in their language. I should mention that these are the greys that you hear about, except they aren't gray. They are sort of beige, and it's clothes anyway. They aren't naked. I don't know if there are others. People say there are, but I've only ever met these. Anyway, you cannot understand them, but they can understand you. And they can put thoughts into your head, but they can't hear your thoughts. You have to speak to them. They cannot hear very well, or else they are not good understanding English, so you have to speak loudly and slowly. I don't know if they understand other languages, but I'm pretty sure they would. They are interested in all of us, in everything that goes on. They like a lot of things about our culture, too. They like some of our music. Bluegrass is their favorite so far as I've seen. They like it a lot. They love that African instrument that looks like a gourd with 13 strings. Love it, but they cannot stand horns or horn music, so they hate classical music and jazz. I think trumpets sort of sound like their language. It's a feeling that I get, but I've never been able to ask them. They've taken me up just about every 2 years, I'd say, since 1987. Just about. Sometimes it's more often, and I didn't go up at all between 1995 and 2000. They usually keep me for what feels like a day, but it turns out to be about 4 hours. Usually. The longest I stayed with them was 3 weeks. During that time, they made me make phone calls and keep up appearances. They aren't really bad, well, I was going to say people. But they're not really bad people. Or whatever. The two that I got sort of close with told me to call them Jack and Gina. I don't know if they are male or female or even if they have different sexes. But I know that those aren't their real names. Those are just names that they told me. They will make contact with Earth on a wide scale in 2021. That's the year when they'll land here, or colonize, or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what their plan is. They don't seem to be evil or dangerous. Their planet is, so they told me anyway, a very long way away. They couldn't explain to me how far, they said, because it was too far for me to understand and it was also close to the side. I have no idea what that meant, but it's always stuck with me. Home is too far away for you to understand, but also close to the side. We don't have anything that they want, so they told me. So I don't really know why they come here or why they've taken so many of us up or why they've gotten to be friends with me. They do not have any religion and they don't need oxygen or water or trees or anything, I don't think. They don't eat people. I don't think they want to breed with us or genetically engineer us. I don't know what they want. But they've been coming here for I'd guess at least 10 or 20,000 years. I'm not very good about history and Upper Paleolithic and all that, but they've got video of all sorts of stuff and they showed me video of Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon, which really were just like us humans except they all had black skin, way less diversity, and all sorts of other human-like things, us's, or whatever. And they showed me video of the pyramids being built in this huge stone building that I guess is lost somewhere or was destroyed, but it was in Europe. I could tell from the video. They have video of them talking with all sorts of people all throughout the history of Earth. They showed me some of them and asked me questions about them, but I couldn't understand any of it because I only speak English, and even English from 200 or 300 years ago was so different that I could hardly understand it. So I told them that they probably knew more about it all than I did. I was up 3 weeks ago. That was the last time. I'm pretty sure that I'll go up again in a couple of years, but I'm not sure after that. The whole program or whatever they call it is going to change in July, 2021. I think they said 8th, but it could also have been 18th. I wasn't hearing very well. They weren't trying to intimidate me or even to warn me, so I don't think we have anything to worry about. I hope they don't show the videos they took of me when they first started taking me up. Because I was so scared and young and they are embarrassing. On numerous occasions, I have seen things that I can't personally explain. One night, I was looking through my telescope at the moon, and took my eye away and noticed something darting across the sky. I thought nothing of it and then saw it move at a 90-degree angle. I can't think of anything that can do that. On another occasion, I was walking my dog and stood, stargazing, while I enjoyed a cigarette before bed. I looked up at the sky and noticed a light moving through the sky. I figured that it was a satellite, but when it started moving in an irregular pattern, I was a bit more interested and watched it until it got to a star in the sky, then promptly disappeared. It was at night. I was woken up, don't remember that part. I was standing in front of a barely open doors. They were made partially of glass so I could see through them. I was staring at them and knew it was going to happen. He was going to visit me. Now I couldn't tell you consciously who he was, but I've just felt his presence. He floated or had this strange way of walking in a fluid way. It seemed like he just levitated to me. First I could see his big, white head which had a strangely flat profile. He approached me. His face was no more than 30 centimeters from mine. He was a typical alien gray. But he was not short. I am 185 centimeters and he was slightly higher than me. He approached me so close that I couldn't really see anything else besides his big, black almond eyes. He stared at me, or through me. With each passing second I've felt like I was getting closer and closer to him. Now, immediately when he approached my face, he started doing something. I don't believe in ghosts, but what he did I can only compare to eating my soul. I've felt like he took the deepest part of my very being. He started showing me things, displaying feelings to me. It was so intense I couldn't really process it consciously. It was dozens of different sensations, pictures of ending Earth. He showed me why I was insignificant. I remember hearing hundreds of souls screaming as they couldn't handle the experience. He showed me what he did to them. I wanted to turn my head from him but I couldn't. His head was attracting my sight like a strong magnet. I could see vibrations coming from around his head. When he wasn't projecting feelings to me, he was saying something to me, or maybe communicating thoughts. It will sound strange, but he did not talk to me in a language, yet I could hear his voice. It was the most powerful thing I've ever heard, and it was inside of my head. His thoughts were so extremely well put. I've tried to fight this entry into my head, but I've never felt so overwhelmed. I can compare it to dueling a modern computer in arithmetics using only abacus. Now I don't believe he was evil. What he has shown me was that we as a humanity are really not worth that much. He showed me my struggles, what I care for, and then made me realize it's really insignificant. He projected to me that we are a part of a bigger scheme, but we are truly redundant. They have a need for us, but it's just a part of their plan, and they know many other worlds. Next thing I remember, I woke up in the morning. I've told everyone about it. I've got bad looks, but I know it was real. It was no dream. That guy was real, and he's the most powerful being I've ever met/heard about. I haven't even seen such a powerful creature in any movie. He projected omnipotence and a deep sense of knowing. What I also remember is that there were other beings like him, but they really weren't separate. They either were different avatars of him, or they formed a collective consciousness/had one purpose in mind. What I don't understand is why would he visit me and do those things? What purpose would that serve to anything? It was 4 years ago, but I still remember it vividly. Sorry if this is not organized, but I thought I would share with you. Edit. To those that say it is fake or something, I don't care. I remember that it shook me to the bone, and when I woke up I felt it was real. To the point that I told other people about it. It was that real. 2010, Los Angeles, California. I was cleaning up around my apartment when I noticed my kitchen lamp swinging and my building rocking. Obviously, earthquake. It lasted for a bit and I called my friend to make sure she was okay. As we were chatting, I was standing out on my balcony which overlooks Runyon Canyon, a popular hiking trail. I suddenly noticed this object hovering high in between the mountains. It was way too high to be a helicopter, and too small and low to be a plane. What made it super strange was its shape and lack of movement. It was orbesque, and stood stagnant for about a solid 3 minutes before moving at a snail's pace to the west. I'm talking slower than any aircraft, blimp, kite, whatever, that I've ever seen. It also seemed to reflect off the sun, but only at some angles. I grabbed my crappy digital camera and tried to capture it as best I could. After moving towards the left and then once again staying completely still, it immediately darted at what seemed like an impossible speed in the opposite direction upwards and disappeared. Plain old man-made, government, or other. It was one of the weirdest, best sightings I've ever experienced, especially since it was in broad daylight. When I looked through the pictures, I thought I got nothing, but after zooming in I noticed the object showed up in 3. I don't have Photoshop or anything, so it's not the clearest quality, but hey, still neat. 2 years ago I was walking my old dog, bless his soul, on a clear August night in northern Massachusetts. Where I live along the Atlantic we do not get much light pollution, and on a good night like this one it's possible to see the faintest stars with only your eyes. I took a break from walking for a minute to light up a cigarette. By some lucky chance, I happened to look into the sky just at the right time to see 2 very tiny faint objects. They were very distant, but it appeared that they were within the Earth's upper atmosphere. Typically, I see satellites and space junk all of the time. What distinguishes something as a satellite or space junk is the linear motion across the sky. These two objects, however, were not moving in any kind of linear fashion. They were weaving, moving away from each other then closer again. They stopped and hovered at one point, and then began moving again. What happened afterward I honestly cannot recall. I must have just gotten up and gone back inside. I remember a feeling of joy upon seeing them, not fear, and also a sense of connection, that there are others out there experiencing the happiness and suffering that we humans endure from day to day. I'm a truth seeker and a lover, forever in search of true love, and I tell you, I felt nothing but love for whatever was out there. I don't tell many people this story because I don't like explaining myself to anyone, but I do believe that it's a story worth taking seriously. I was driving back home to Los Angeles with a friend of mine after visiting family near Phoenix, Arizona. We were headed west on Highway 58 just out of Boron, California en route to Mojave to catch the 14. It was night and we were jamming out to some music. The next thing I know I'm waking up, looking around and realizing that I was pulled over on the side of the road and that approximately 3 hours had passed. My buddy was fast asleep so I woke him up and we both kind of had a psychological meltdown. After we calmed down a little we went home and never really spoke of it since. I have absolutely no idea when or how we transitioned from listening loud music and driving down the road to waking up safe on the side of the road. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.